Sarah was still talking about the rules when the elevator at the far end of the foyer chimed. Every staff member Sarah could see went rigid at exactly the same moment. No one said anything. She turned around. The man who stepped out of the elevator was tall in a way that felt considered. Black suit, the kind that didn't wrinkle because it wouldn't dare. Sharp jaw. A face so composed it looked like it had never once in its life done something accidentally. He moved through the room like the room had been built specifically to frame him, which she was beginning to suspect it had been. She looked at him the way she looked at things she found genuinely interesting, openly, unhurried, without any particular concern for how it appeared. Up, then down, then back up again. The grape she was holding was still in her cheek. "Oh," she said. "Okay," she swallowed. "Nobody told me the boss looked like that." The room stopped working. "Mrs. O," the head housekeeper made a sound that wasn't a word. One of the housekeepers near the window appeared to be praying. Kwon Jae-hyun's eyes found her and stayed. He looked at her the way a man looks at a fire that has appeared in a room with no fireplace. Not with fear, exactly, but with the very particular attention of someone trying to determine whether this was a problem that had a solution or simply a new condition of the world they would have to adapt to. His mouth opened, almost imperceptibly. He was, she understood, about to say something. Probably something about her employment status. That was when she noticed his lips. Her head tilted. She couldn't help it. It was a physical response, involuntary, the same one she got when she saw something that didn't quite compute and needed a slightly different angle to process it. "Wait," she squinted. "Are your lips pink? Like, naturally pink?" Somewhere to the left of Jae-hyun, a man in a gray suit, trim, watchful, stopped breathing. "They're so pink," Sarah continued. "Sir, I love your lips. Are those real? Did God just personally decide to bless your face, or do you use something? Because that tone is extraordinary. That's not a product. That's genetics. That's favoritism." 3 housekeepers were examining the floor with great focus. The man in the gray suit looked like he was mentally composing a letter of resignation, then deciding he couldn't leave, then reconsidering. Jae-hyun blinked. Once, twice. In 15 years of running an organization that made governments pause before returning calls, no one, not a single person in any room in any country, had ever commented on his lips. "Who hired you?" His voice was quiet, controlled, the voice of a man who had not raised it in a very long time and no longer needed to. "Mrs. O," Sarah said pleasantly, but honestly, she really buried the lead on this job. She paused, tilted her head in the other direction, considered him with the frank curiosity she applied to all things she found worth considering. "Do you have a girlfriend?" The room produced a sound like air escaping slowly from something that had been holding pressure for a very long time. Jae-hyun looked at her, one long, complete, entirely unreadable look, and then he turned and walked away. His footsteps made no sound on the marble. He moved like a person who had decided something, though what he'd decided was impossible to tell. Sarah watched him go. "I'll take that as a no," she called after him cheerfully, and reached back toward the grape bowl. No one else saw it, only the man in the gray suit still standing exactly where he'd been, in the position he'd held since the elevator opened. Seung-woo, 9 years in Jae-hyun's service, present for negotiations and emergencies, and moments that didn't get written down anywhere. He was watching the empty corridor where his employer had just disappeared. The left corner of Jae-hyun's mouth had moved, not a smile, not even close to a smile. A fraction of one, a single degree of suggestion, there and gone, just before he turned the corner, visible only because Seung-woo had spent 9 years seeing that face and knew every position it held. He looked back at Sarah. "Hold on. Pause. If you're watching right now, kindly comment below where you're watching from and the time. Now back to the story." Sarah was eating another grape. Unbothered. Completely cosmically unbothered, as though she had not just detonated something in the middle of a room full of people trained to prevent exactly that. Seung-woo stood very still for a moment. Something, he thought, has gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. He was not yet sure if that was a problem. Mrs. O moved fast for a woman in kitten heels. She had Sarah by the wrist before the last echo of, "I'll take that as a no," had finished bouncing off the marble, pulling her with the focused urgency of someone who had seen disasters develop in slow motion and was determined, this once, to outrun one. The pantry was off the main kitchen. shelved floor to ceiling, smelling of dried herbs and imported stock. Mrs. O closed the door and turned around. She was not whispering anymore. She gripped Sarah by both arms and told her everything, not the polished version, the real version, who Jae-hyun was, what the Kwon name meant in rooms where things were decided without being written down, the kinds of men who moved through this penthouse and what they were capable of. Sarah listened, actually listened this time. So he's basically a king. He is extremely dangerous, a dangerous king with pink lips. Sarah. Mrs. O. She raised one calm hand. I grew up with 4 older brothers. I once talked my way out of a motorbike robbery with eye contact and a warm Fanta. I have been in dangerous situations. This is not a Fanta situation. They never are. She tied her apron and walked out. Until they are. Mrs. O stood alone among the shelves. She closed her eyes and began to pray, not dramatically, just sincerely, with the genuine spiritual investment of a woman who had exhausted all earthly options. That evening, Sarah was mopping the east hallway when Jae-hyun turned the corner. She moved the bucket 2 inches without looking up. Careful, just did this side. He stepped over it and kept walking. Sarah watched him go, then paused. She had been in this corridor for nearly an hour. She had seen him come from this exact direction 20 minutes ago. There was nothing down this hallway he would have needed twice. No office, no reason. She opened her mouth to say something. Then she saw it. On the hallway table, next to the vase, a small dish. White, simple, sliced mango, fanned out with quiet deliberation. She had mopped around that table 40 minutes ago. There had been nothing there, no note, no explanation. She looked at the empty corridor where he'd disappeared, then back at the dish. Something moved in her chest that she wasn't ready to name. She pressed her lips flat, because she was a professional, and she had been here exactly 11 hours. Then she ate all the mango anyway. She was smiling. She forced it down. It came back. She gave up and let it sit on her face for 10 seconds before breathing it flat and picking up the mop. Professional, she reminded herself. She finished every slice before moving on. The dinner had 8 men and the atmospheric pressure of a room where everyone was performing calm. Sarah moved through it cleanly, pouring water, setting plates, taking up exactly the space required and no more. She was good at this, had trained herself into the shape of someone who could be in a room without disturbing it. Park had too much cologne and the energy of a man who'd never been corrected by someone he didn't think could touch him. She was leaning over to refill his glass when he said it, low, unhurried, the kind of comment that understood its own power. The table went still. Everyone looked at Jae-hyun. This was the mechanism. The boss determined what mattered. They were all waiting to find out if she did. Sarah set the pitcher down slowly, turned to Park with an expression so warm, so open, so genuinely pleasant, the 2 men across the table leaned back without quite knowing why. I'm sorry. Could you say that again? Her voice was even, almost melodic. A little louder, so everyone at this table hears exactly what you just said to the help? Park's mouth opened. Nothing came out. No? She picked the pitcher back up. Enjoy your meal. She walked out. Perfect posture, not a single tremor. The door swung shut behind her with a soft, definitive click. The men discovered a sudden deep interest in their soup. Under the table, out of sight, Jae-hyun's hand closed into a slow, quiet fist. His jaw tightened by 1 degree. Sung-woo tracked it from across the table. He had seen smaller signals from this man precede larger consequences for people. He filed it away and said nothing. What he didn't see was Sarah around the corner, pressing her back against the wall and flattening her palm to her chest. She stood there for 30 full seconds, breathing. The kind of breathing you do when you've been holding it and didn't realize how long until the moment you finally let go. She handled it. She always handled it. But her hand was trembling, slightly, just slightly, the fine involuntary report of what it actually cost. She looked at her hand. She straightened up. She went back to work. She never found out what happened to Park. He wasn't there the following week, or any week after. The next morning, at the small staff kitchen table where she always ate, at the time she always sat there, a bowl of mango, fresh, already sliced, ripe in the deliberate way, and beside it, a cup of tea, still steaming, no note, nothing that named itself as anything. Sarah wrapped both hands around the cup, sat with it for a long moment. The steam rose. The mango was fanned in that same precise way, placed by someone who had noticed, her table, her time, her preference. She hadn't told anyone how she took her tea. She drank it anyway. It exactly right. That night, Sarah lay on her back in the dark of the staff quarters and cataloged them with the systematic focus of someone who had grown up sharing walls with 4 brothers and learned early that unfamiliar sounds were either nothing or something, and the difference mattered. Pipe. Settling. Wind against the high windows. That one was probably a person. She sat up. "Sarah Mensah," she whispered to the ceiling. "You moved into a Mafia penthouse on purpose." The ceiling offered nothing. She found her slippers, wrapped the throw blanket, the penthouse one, the one that cost more than her previous month's rent, the one she was absolutely using anyway, around her shoulders, and shuffled to the kitchen in the dark. The bonnet was on. The bonnet was always on. Some standards were non-negotiable regardless of circumstance. She climbed onto the counter, located the cereal by feel, and ate in the dark with the bowl in her lap and her fuzzy slippers dangling. "You walked in," she continued quietly, because narrating helped, "and the first thing you did was comment on the man's lips. A spoonful. His lips, Sarah, to his face, on day 1. She shook her head at herself. You asked if he had a girlfriend. Another spoonful. You ate his mango." The kitchen light clicked on. Jae-hyun stood in the doorway in a plain dark shirt and sweatpants, looking more human than she had believed him capable of being, and staring at her with the expression of a man who had come for a glass of water and found instead an entirely different problem sitting on his counter in a bonnet, wrapped in his throw blanket with a bowl of his cereal in her lap. The silence was very complete. "Is that my cereal?" Sarah looked in the bowl, looked up. There was no name on it. He should have told her to go to bed, should have turned around, retrieved whatever he came for, and left. She watched him make the decision in real time, watched something cross his face and get set aside, and then he opened the cabinet, took a bowl, and poured himself cereal. He leaned against the opposite counter and ate. They sat in the dark kitchen in companionable silence that had no business being as comfortable as it was. Sarah lasted 4 minutes. "Do you have a girlfriend?" "I asked before, but you walked away." "I walked away on purpose." "I know, I'm asking anyway." A beat, long enough to be a choice. "No." She ate another spoonful, let it sit for exactly the right amount of time. "Do you want one?" He looked up. She looked back, completely, maddeningly unbothered, blanket slipping off one shoulder, spoon resting in the corner of her mouth. She was not performing calm. She simply was calm in the way of someone who had decided to ask a thing and was comfortable waiting for the answer. He held eye contact for 3 full seconds. Then he set his bowl in the sink and walked out without a single word. Sarah sat very still. She looked at the doorway, then down at his bowl on the counter. He'd barely eaten any of it, had left it beside the sink rather than putting it away. She was about to reach for it when she noticed the other thing. The mango. The leftover bowl from that morning, still sitting where she'd left it on the far counter. He had stopped there on his way to the door. She could trace it, the slight deviation in the path he would have taken, and covered it with a small plate. Neatly. Precisely. So it wouldn't dry out overnight. She hadn't asked. She hadn't mentioned it. He had simply looked at it and done one small, unnecessary thing. Sarah stared at that plate for a long time. "Lord," she whispered, "why are you doing this to me?" She noticed it on the 3rd day, then the 4th, then the 5th. Jae-hyun had a habit of being in rooms she was already cleaning. He never announced it, never explained it. He simply appeared in the corner of the library with a book or standing at the sitting room window, and occupied her space with the absolute ease of a man who owned the building and had decided, apparently, to exercise that right in whichever room she happened to be in. On the 6th day, she said something. "You know," she said, climbing the step stool to reach the high library shelf, "most bosses don't hang around where their maid is working." Silence. "I'm not complaining, just an observation." "I own the room," he said, without looking up. "You own a lot of rooms." She stretched toward the top shelf, 1 inch too short, the step stool trembling slightly beneath her. "You don't sit in all of them." He looked up. She didn't see it. She was on her toes, reaching, the stool wobbling, but she felt the room shift a half-second before he was simply there, behind her. One hand braced against the shelf beside her head, steadying it, steadying her, close enough that when she turned her head she nearly put her cheek directly against his jaw. She went completely still. He reached past her, retrieved the book from the top shelf, and held it out at a distance that was no longer professional by any reasonable definition. She could count his eyelashes. She could confirm, up very close, that yes, the lips were exactly that pink. "Thank you," she said, very quietly. No follow-up, no joke, nothing else. Just those two words in a voice that came out softer than she intended, softer than her usual voice, softer than she would have liked. He stepped back, returned to his chair, opened his book like the previous 30 seconds had not occurred. Sarah stood on the step stool and did not move for 4 full seconds. When she climbed down, her hands were not entirely steady. She turned back to the shelves and began dusting with great focus, the practiced neutrality of someone who needed something to do with her face. After a moment, she glanced across the room. He was already looking at her. He dropped his eyes to the page immediately, clean, fast, like a reflex. But not fast enough. He had been looking. He had already been looking. Sarah turned back to the shelves. She was smiling. It started small, and then it wasn't, spreading slow and warm across her face, and she let it, just for a moment, just for herself, before she pressed her lips together and got back to work. She didn't stop smiling for a very long time. Seung-woo found her in the east corridor at 7:40 in the morning, which told Sarah he had been waiting, that he had tracked her schedule, noted her route, and positioned himself accordingly. She filed this away without comment, because it was useful information about the kind of man Seung-woo was, and Sarah had always been a careful student of useful information. "Can we talk?" he said. It wasn't really a question. She followed him to the small sitting room off the second hallway. Neutral ground, no cameras she could see, the door left open just enough to be deliberate. He had thought about this. She sat across from him and folded her hands in her lap and waited. He laid it out plainly, which she respected. No theater, no vague implications designed to unsettle her. Just facts, delivered by a man who had clearly rehearsed them and was delivering them anyway, with the slightly desperate energy of someone who knew they were trying to stop something that had already started moving. What Jae-hyun had built, what it required of him, the weight of a life like that, and what it did to the people who got close to it, not through cruelty necessarily, but through the simple, structural reality that some positions consumed everything in their orbit. And then the other thing, the thing he said carefully, with the precision of a man choosing every word, the last person who had gotten close. What had happened? Where they were now, which was nowhere anyone talked about. He wasn't threatening her. That was the thing. She could feel the difference, had been able to feel that difference since she was 12 years old, and learning which of her brother's friends meant what they said, and which ones were performing it. Seung-woo meant every word, and he meant it because he was afraid, and he was afraid because he had been standing next to Jae-hyun for 9 years and he could see something happening that he didn't have a category for. She let him finish. "Are you telling me this so I'll leave?" she said. "Or so I'll be careful?" He opened his mouth, closed it. Something moved across his face, the particular expression of a man who had prepared for several responses, and not this one. "Both." "Okay." She nodded slowly, the nod of someone actually processing rather than performing agreement. "I appreciate it. I mean that." She stood. "For what it's worth. I'm not naive. I know exactly what kind of house I'm standing in. I knew on day one." She paused, straightening her apron with the same efficient motion she always used, the habit of someone who had learned to be ready. "But where I'm from, complicated people can still have good in them. I've known men who ran things I didn't agree with and still showed up for their people in ways that counted. I don't lead with fear. I never have. It hasn't killed me yet." She moved to the door and stopped. "Also," she said, and her voice shifted back into its ordinary register, easy and unbothered, "tell your boss he's been leaving his cereal bowl in the sink. The dishwasher's right there. Truly unacceptable behavior from a man of his stature." She left. Seung-woo sat in the small sitting room for a moment. He had spoken to lawyers, diplomats, men who negotiated for a living, people specifically trained to remain unmoved. He picked up the folder he'd brought as a prop and stood and walked toward Jae-hyun's office to relay the conversation, organizing it in his head as he went. He stopped at the doorway. Jae-hyun was standing just inside, not at his desk, not on the phone, not reviewing anything. Standing near the door, still in the way he went still when he was processing something and didn't want the processing to show. The two men looked at each other. He had heard. The door had been open. The sitting room was not far. He had heard most of it, or all of it, and his face was doing the thing it did when something had happened that he had not arranged for and was not yet certain what to do with. Sheng-Wu said nothing. There was nothing to say that the silence wasn't already saying better. Jae-hyun walked past him without a word, back to his desk. He sat down. He opened something in front of him and looked at it with great focus. Sheng-Wu walked back to his own office and sat at his desk and stared at his wall for a moment. Then he opened his laptop and got back to work. There was nothing else to do. The avalanche, he was now fairly certain, was no longer stoppable. He wasn't sure anymore if he wanted to stop it. He wasn't sure, and that surprised him, because he had been sure about everything in this job for 9 years. That evening, Sarah went to collect dishes from the kitchen. The cereal bowl was in the dishwasher. She picked it up, turned it over in her hands. A plain white bowl, expensive in the understated way everything in this penthouse was expensive, in the dishwasher, where the dishwasher was, directly beside the sink where it had been left every single time prior. She laughed. Just once, short, disbelieving, the laugh that escapes before you decide whether to let it, and she was still holding the bowl when she turned around. Jae-hyun was standing in the kitchen doorway. He was watching her laugh. She caught it before he could arrange his face. One unguarded second, just one, a half beat where his expression was entirely open and entirely undefended. Something warm, something that lived behind everything else he showed the world, behind the composure and the silence and the controlled jaw. Something that looked almost like a man who had been waiting, not for anything specific, not consciously, just quietly and for a long time. For someone to laugh in his kitchen like that. Then it was gone. His face settled. He looked at her with his ordinary expression. Sarah looked back at him. She was still, holding the bowl. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she placed the bowl carefully back in the dishwasher, closed it, and picked up the dish tray she'd come for. "Good placement," she said. She walked past him out of the kitchen. She was smiling again, the one she couldn't stop, the warm, involuntary one, and this time she didn't bother pressing it flat. The next 3 days, there was a small party of some sort, and Sarah wore a dress. The dress was simple. Deep green, clean lines, nothing designed to announce itself. Sarah had packed it for occasions that required more than her uniform and less than formality, the practical middle ground of a woman who had learned to be prepared for various categories of situation. It was not designed to make anyone stop mid-sentence. Jae-hyun stopped mid-sentence. She saw it from across the room, or rather, she saw the pause, the fraction of a second where he was speaking to the man beside him. And then he wasn't, his gaze moving across the room and finding her the way a compass finds north, not searching but arriving. 2 seconds, maybe 3. Then he was speaking again, seamless, the recovery of a man who had spent years ensuring nothing showed. Sheng-Wu, standing at his shoulder, raised his champagne glass to cover his mouth. The evening moved the way these evenings moved. Crystal and low music and conversations conducted in the register of people who were always performing something. Sarah passed drinks and guided guests and kept her expression calibrated to pleasant and professional. And it was fine. She was good at fine. She had been good at fine since long before this job. The man near the bar was expensively dressed and had the specific confidence of someone who had never been told no by anyone he considered worth listening to. He had decided, somewhere in the logic of the evening, that a polished smile was an invitation. Sarah kept smiling and kept redirecting and kept managing it with the practiced efficiency she brought to all things that needed managing, but he was persistent in the way that certain men were persistent, not reading or not caring, and the distinction rarely mattered in practice. She was handling it. She was always handling it. Then the temperature in the corner changed. Jae-hyun didn't announce himself, didn't speak to the man, didn't gesture, didn't do anything that could be named or described or pointed to. He simply appeared beside her, a glass in his hand, looking forward, still, with the quiet, absolute, immovable energy of a man who had made a decision and was expressing it through presence alone. The kind of stillness that had weight, the kind that didn't need to explain itself. The man found somewhere else to be. Immediately, without another word, as though he had just remembered an urgent obligation across the room, Jae-hyun stood beside her, looking forward, saying nothing. Sarah looked up at him. "You know I had that handled." "I know. So why—" "Enjoy the evening, Sarah." She stopped. He had said her name before. She had heard it in passing, in the household, in the way names circulate through a place, but not like that. Not directed at her, not in that voice, not at that proximity with that particular quality of intention behind it. Her name in his mouth sounded like something he'd been careful with, like he had picked it up and weighed it before he used it. She opened her mouth, closed it. He walked back into the crowd, unhurried, the same way he did everything, like time arranged itself around his preferences rather than the other way around. Sarah stood in the middle of the gala. Music moved around her. Crystal caught the light. 100 people conducted their performances at various distances, and none of it was particularly loud or particularly relevant. She stood in the center of it and felt the sound of her own name and his voice settle somewhere in her chest, quietly, without asking permission, the way something settles when it has decided it belongs there. Like it had just moved in, like it had no plans to leave. It was like a light switching off, not dramatically, nothing so readable, just the curtain coming down, smooth and complete, across everything she thought she'd been seeing for the past week. The Jai Hyun who appeared in her kitchen at 2 a.m. and covered her mango with a small plate was simply gone, replaced by the original version, composed, unreachable, professional in the specific way of someone who had decided professionalism was a wall and was standing behind it. He didn't look at her differently. That was almost the worst part. He looked at her the way he looked at all the staff, correctly, appropriately, with exactly the right amount of nothing. Sarah gave it 48 hours. She was fair. She believed in giving things room to be what they were before she named them. Maybe he was tired. Maybe something had happened. She cleaned her rooms and mopped her corridors and did not manufacture reasons to be wherever he was, and she watched the curtain stay down, and on the morning of the third day, she knocked once on his office door and walked in. "Did I do something wrong?" she said. "Or are you just rotating through personality settings?" He looked up from his desk. Something moved behind his eyes and got suppressed before it surfaced. When he spoke, it was measured, each word placed with the care of a man constructing something load-bearing. She should remember her position. Familiarity was not something he had extended to her. If she had interpreted certain moments as something they were not, that was a misreading she should correct. The household ran better with clear boundaries. He should have been clearer sooner. He stopped. She watched him stop, watched him hear himself, the words landing back on him the way wrong things did when the room was quiet enough, and she did not help him out of it. She let the silence sit. "Noted," she said. One word. Quiet even, with no edges on it. No jokes, no deflection, no warm follow-up designed to make the moment easier to survive. She turned and walked to the door. At the threshold she stopped, her back still to him. For the record, her voice was steady, not performing steadiness, just steady, the way she was when things actually mattered. "I didn't manufacture any of it. The kitchen, the library, the gala. A beat. That was all you. I just showed up." She left. Jae-hyun sat at his desk and did not move for a while. The office had the specific quality of a room where something true had just been said and was still present in the air. He picked up his phone, set it down, picked it up again, looked at it, set it down. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He got up and went to find Seung-woo. Seung-woo was at his desk, reviewing something. He looked up, took one look at Jae-hyun's face and said, "Finally." Before Jae-hyun had opened his mouth, the word landed strangely. "What do you mean, finally?" "Sir," Seung-woo's voice was patient, "we all eat breakfast in that kitchen." Jae-hyun looked at him. Something cold moved through his expression. "She told you about the mango." Seung-woo's face did not change. Not a single muscle. Everyone knows about the mango. The silence that followed was the most humbling of Kwon Jae-hyun's adult life. He stood in the doorway of his right-hand man's office and understood, with the slow and thorough comprehension of a man receiving information he had somehow failed to gather himself, that the staff of his own household had been watching him cover fruit and haunt corridors and drift toward the east wing at hours that served no operational purpose, and had been aware of all of it and had said nothing to him and had apparently been discussing it among themselves at breakfast. Seung-woo looked back at his papers with the serene expression of a man at peace. Jae-hyun walked back to his office. He sat down. He looked at the door she had walked out of. He thought about the word noted and the particular way she'd said it. Not cold, not injured, just honest, the way she said everything. And he thought about "I just showed up," which was the most accurate and the most devastating summary of the past 10 days he could have constructed himself. He stayed at his desk for a long time. She had found a folding chair somewhere. He had no idea where. The penthouse did not, to his knowledge, contain folding chairs, and yet there it was, positioned in the corner of the rooftop that caught the last of the evening light. She had a cup of tea. She had the expression of someone who had already done the hard internal work of the past few hours and arrived somewhere quieter on the other side of it. He crossed the rooftop and sat on the ledge beside her. She didn't tell him to leave. For a while, neither of them said anything. It didn't require filling. She had that quality, the ability to make silence feel like something chosen rather than something that had fallen. Then Jae-hyun said, very quietly, "I don't know how to do this." She looked at him. He meant it. That was the thing about him, she had learned, the thing beneath all the composure. When he said something, he meant it completely. This was the most unguarded she had ever heard him, possibly the most unguarded he had been with any living person in longer than she could estimate, and it sat in the air between them without apology. "Do what?" she said. He looked at her. "This." Sarah held his gaze, the sharp jaw, the careful eyes, the lips, still, objectively, extraordinary, that had started this entire situation 10 days ago when she'd been standing in his foyer with a grape in her cheek and no self-preservation instinct to speak of. She felt the smile coming. The real one, wide, unstoppable, the one she normally tried to modulate because it took over her whole face, and she'd been told more than once it was a lot. She let it come. "Well," she said, picking up her tea, "good thing I know how to do enough for both of us." He looked at her for a long moment. The city moved below. The sky deepened. And then, finally, fully, with the quality of something that had been held back a long time and simply could not be held any longer, Kwon Jae-hyun smiled, small, quiet, but completely, entirely real. Sarah stared at it. "Oh no," she whispered. "What?" "You have dimples." Her voice had gone faint. "You have dimples, Jae-hyun." She looked at him with the expression of someone receiving genuinely unfair news. "This is so unfair. This is genuinely so unfair." I was almost composed. He laughed, an actual laugh, surprised out of him, the kind that doesn't ask permission first. It lasted only a moment, but it was real, and it was his, and it changed his whole face into something she wanted to look at for a very long time. Downstairs, in his office, Seung-woo heard it through the ceiling. He put his pen down. He sat back in his chair. Then, quietly, to no one in particular, he said, "Finally." 3 weeks and nothing had been said out loud. That was the thing about it. The shape of what existed between them had no name yet, just texture. The last of the good coffee saved without being asked. The knowledge of exactly how he took his tea, acquired through observation rather than conversation. The evenings where they occupied the same space with a comfort that didn't require explanation. Seung-woo had started smiling in hallways for no discernible reason. Mrs. O had quietly retired her prayers and replaced them with something that looked, cautiously, like hope. It was the kind of thing that existed perfectly in the space before words ruined it. Then the man arrived. Sarah didn't see him come in. She heard the shift in the building's atmosphere before she understood it, the particular quality of silence that moved through the staff like weather, the way the guards on the upper floor repositioned without being told. She'd learned to read the penthouse the way she'd learned to read every place she'd ever lived, by paying attention to what it did when it thought no one was watching. Whatever was happening upstairs, it was significant. She made tea and stayed in the kitchen and didn't ask. In the formal meeting room, the man sat across from Jae-hyun with the ease of someone who had calculated exactly how much comfort he could afford and had decided on a great deal of it. Old business, a line being drawn. The conversation moved through its necessary stages with the surface civility of two people who understood that the words being said were not entirely the point. Then, somewhere in the middle of it, he smiled. "I've noticed something different about you recently, Kwon." Pleasantly, conversationally, the tone of a man making an observation he had prepared in advance. Something softer. The room's temperature changed. Every person in it felt it. The guards, Seung-woo, the two men who had arrived with the visitor. "The girl," he said, "the black one, the maid." Every person went cold. Jae-hyun's face revealed nothing. His voice revealed nothing. His hands, flat on the table, revealed nothing. Not tension, not response, not the thing that was happening behind his eyes, which no one in that room could read and no one would have wanted to. He said calmly, "We're getting off topic," and redirected the meeting without a single visible reaction and brought it to its conclusion, and stood when the man stood and walked him to the door with the composed courtesy of a host who has given nothing away. The second the door closed, he turned to Seung-woo. 4 words, quietly, without inflection. Seung-woo nodded once and was already moving before the sentence finished. Sarah looked up when she heard the footsteps, because she knew his footsteps by now, had learned them the way you learn things you hadn't meant to study. But it wasn't him. Seung-woo appeared in the kitchen doorway with his coat already on and an expression she had never seen on him before. Not his professional neutrality, not his carefully suppressed amusement. Something urgent and controlled and serious in a way that reached her before his words did. "You need to pack a bag," she set her cup down. "What?" "Tonight. Now." "Seung-woo, what's going—" "He'll explain." A pause, just one. "He's coming down." Sarah stood very still. Her heart was doing something her face wasn't showing. She was good at that, had been good at that since she was young, the separation of interior weather from exterior expression. She looked at Seung-woo's face and read what was there and understood that whatever had happened in the last hour was not a small thing. The kitchen door opened. Jae-hyun walked in. She had studied him carefully over the past weeks, all his versions, all the faces he wore for different rooms and different purposes, the composed one, the distant one, the one she'd seen on the rooftop with dimples she was still not fully over. She knew his face. This one she had never seen. Not cold, not distant, not the controlled mask of the man who ran the syndicate and made governments pause before returning calls. Something stripped of all of that, something underneath it, exposed in a way that looked like it cost him considerably to let her see. Something that looked, with a clarity that reached into her chest and held on, like fear. Not for himself. She knew the difference. She had always known the difference. "Sarah," he said, just her name, the way he'd said it at the gala, but different now. No composure behind it, just her name, said by a man who had looked at something and understood what it meant and come down here because of it. She looked at him across the kitchen. Outside, the city ran its sounds, indifferent and continuous. The tea she'd been drinking had gone cold. Somewhere upstairs a door closed, and the building resettled into its ordinary sounds. And none of it was relevant to what was happening in this kitchen right now, which was a man who had spent 32 years being unreachable, standing in a doorway and looking at her like she was something he could not afford to lose and had only just fully understood why. Sarah stood up slowly from the counter. "Okay," she said quietly, not to the situation. To him. "Okay, I see you. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me to." He crossed the kitchen toward her, and she let him come, and behind him the door swung gently shut. He told her everything. She listened to all of it without speaking, her hands flat on the counter, her face doing the thing it did when things actually mattered. Still, attentive, giving him the full weight of her attention while he laid it out. Someone had noticed her, had made a point of noticing. In his world, being seen because of him was the specific, targeted kind of dangerous that didn't resolve on its own. When he finished, the kitchen held the silence. "So what happens now?" she asked. "You go somewhere safe. Seung-woo has a place. 2 of my most trusted people until this is handled." "And you?" "I handle it. That's not what I asked." He looked at her. "Sarah, I asked about you." She stood. "I don't care about the place or the guards or the plan." She held his gaze with the same directness she'd had since day one, since the grape, since the lips question that had apparently started the unraveling of both their lives. "Are you going to be okay?" He stared at her. This woman. Broken suitcase wheel, bonnet and fuzzy slippers at 2 a.m. There was no name on it. Who had pressed her shaking hand to her chest in a corridor after dinner and then walked back to work. Who had told Seung-woo plainly and without performance that complicated people could still have good in them. Who had walked straight through every wall he'd built, not around them, not over them, through them, eating a grape, completely unbothered. He closed the distance in 3 steps and took her face in both hands and kissed her. No preamble, no words, just that, in the kitchen, at whatever hour this had become. She went still for 1 second, one, just one, and then she kissed him back, her hand finding the front of his shirt and gripping it like she'd been waiting 3 weeks for something to hold on to. When they pulled apart, she kept her eyes closed for a moment. Then, "Your lips are even softer than they look." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Sarah, I'm just saying, I called it on day 1. That's called vision." He pressed his forehead against hers, and for one moment the syndicate and the rival and the thing that was coming did not exist. Just the kitchen. Just her hand twisted in his shirt. Just this. Then he pulled back. His face had shifted into something resolved and calm and quietly terrifying, the face of a man who had decided something and would not be moved from it. He picked up her hand, looked at it once, then looked at her. "When I come to get you, and I will come to get you, I want to have a conversation." "About what?" "About what you are to me." Sarah Mensah, who had not once in her life been short of words, opened her mouth. Nothing came out. He squeezed her hand once and let go, and walked out of the kitchen. Sheng Wu appeared in the doorway holding her coat. "Ready?" Sarah looked at the door. She touched her lips once, quickly, just once, checking, then straightened up and took the coat. "Let's go." 3 days. That's how long Sarah sits in Sheng Wu's safe house, a clean, quiet apartment on the other side of Seoul, with 2 guards outside the door, bad television, and the specific torture of not knowing. Sheng Wu checks in twice a day. He never says much. She stops asking questions he won't answer and starts asking the ones he will. Does he do this a lot? Go handle things alone? Yes. Does he come back? Sheng Wu looks at her steadily. He always comes back. A pause. He has more reason to now. Sarah looks out the window and says nothing, but she stops pacing after that. On the 3rd night she can't sleep, which is becoming her signature move, and she's sitting on the kitchen counter again, out of habit, eating cereal in the dark. She has decided something, somewhere between day 2 and day 3. She has decided that if he walks back through a door in one piece, she is not going to be someone who plays it small. She came to Seoul with a broken suitcase wheel, and absolutely no plan, and she asked a Korean Mafia boss about his lips on the first day, because she has never once in her life looked at something worth having and pretended she didn't want it. She's not starting now. She hears the front door. She doesn't move. She listens, one set of footsteps, steady, unhurried, and then the kitchen light clicks on. Jae-hyun stands in the doorway, dark coat, tired eyes, a small cut above his left brow that is already healing. He looks at her on the counter with her cereal bowl and her bonnet, and her absolute refusal to be anywhere other than exactly where she is. Something in his face, that careful, controlled 15 years of Wall's face, comes completely undone. "You're eating my cereal again," he says. "You found me in a safe house to talk about cereal?" He walks in, sits on the counter beside her, close, shoulder to shoulder, and reaches over and takes a spoonful directly from her bowl. She lets him. They sit like that for a moment, the way they have sat in kitchens before, except everything is different now and both of them know it. Then he says, "I told you I wanted to have a conversation. I remember. About what you are to me. I remember that too." She keeps her eyes forward. Her heart is doing its absolute most. "So talk." He's quiet for a beat. Jae-hyun is not a man who has ever had to find words for something like this. He has spent his entire adult life making sure there was never anything like this to find words for. But he looks at her profile, the set of her jaw, the way she's pretending to be calmer than she is, the bonnet slightly askew on her head, and the words come anyway. "You walked into my house and you were not afraid of me. I was a little afraid of you. You asked about my lips. I stand by that. Sarah." He turns to look at her properly. She turns too. Eye contact at close range, the way it keeps happening with them, like gravity. "I've spent a long time making sure nothing could touch me. Nothing. I was very good at it." A pause. "And then you came in with a broken suitcase and ate my fruit, and I have not had a single quiet thought since." Sarah stares at him. Then, softly, "That's the most words I've ever heard you say at once. Don't make it weird." "I'm not making it weird. I'm emotional. Sarah, you're telling me I broke through 15 years of emotional armor with a grape and a comment about your lips, Jae-hyun. I'm allowed to be a little emotional." He kisses her. Again. In a kitchen. Because apparently this is where they live now. This time it's slower. No urgency, no danger at the door, just him and her in the quiet of a city at 2 a.m. When they pull apart, she has both hands on his face, thumbs near his jaw, and she looks at him the way she looked at him on that very first day, openly, unashamedly, like she has absolutely no interest in pretending. "So," she says, "what am I to you?" He covers her hands with his. "Everything I didn't plan for." His voice is low and completely certain, which, in my experience, is always the thing that matters most. Sarah is quiet for a moment. Then she says, "Okay, good," and leans her head on his shoulder like she's been doing it for years. He stays very still for exactly 2 seconds, the last reflex of a man who has spent a long time not letting people close, and then his arm comes around her, steady and sure. They sit on the counter together in the dark. No words for a while. Just that. Then Sarah says, "You know this is a completely insane situation, right? I came here to clean your floors." "I know. I asked about your lips on day 1. I remember, I think about it often." She lifts her head. "You do?" The corner of his mouth moves. The same corner. The one Sung-woo saw on the very first day. "I went back down that hallway," he says, "because I wanted to see if you were real." Sarah stares at him. Then she points at him. "I knew you didn't need to come back that way. I knew it. You said nothing. I was being professional. You had already asked me if I had a girlfriend. That was separate." She stops. He is smiling, fully, both dimples, entirely real. And it remains, the most unfair thing she has ever seen in her life. Stop smiling like that. Why? Because I called the lips on day 1, and I cannot also be expected to handle dimples at 2 a.m. It's too much. There should be a limit. He laughs, pulls her back in. She goes, still talking, muffled against his shoulder, and his laugh settles into something quieter and warmer. The laugh of a man who has found something he didn't know he was missing and has decided, completely and without negotiation, to keep it. 6 months later, the Kwan Syndicate has a new rule that nobody put in writing, but everyone follows without question. Nobody looks at, speaks to, or thinks sideways about the woman with the loud suitcase and the bonnet who eats cereal on the kitchen counter and makes the boss smile in hallways. Sung-woo, for his part, takes full credit. Mrs. O cries a little at breakfast one morning and tells nobody why. And Sarah Mensah, who came to Seoul with no plan and a broken wheel, sits across from Jae-hyun at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning, his newspaper, her tea, his hand over hers on the table like it was always supposed to be there, and thinks that some jobs really do bury the lead. She wouldn't change a single grape.